So welcome back to the series of webinars created to talk about opportunities of shared learning around marine-based Indigenous protected and conserved areas, IPCAs. Tonight, we're going to hear from two speakers, which is pretty special. We have Heather Barna, a collaborative conservation planner, and Akolu Lindsay, coming virtually all the way from Hawaii to talk to us about community-led management planning, the rising tide that guides our collective ancestral canoe into the future. I promised it last week, and we're here tonight, so thank you for being back with us. As always, while people continue to filter in, I'll just get started by introducing myself. My name is still Beth Borchert, Marine Protected Areas Coordinator for the Gwilimimaglu Suahan, or KMK. I hope I'm getting better at saying that as we go. A little bit about the organization. KMK was created to oversee the negotiations and consultation process between the Mi'kmaq of Nova Scotia, the province, and the Government of Canada. KMK is governed and receives their mandates from the Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq Chiefs, and collectively, we work on broader nation issues for the Mi'kmaq of Nova Scotia. These webinars have always been a group effort in partnership with other Mi'kmaq organizations and supporters. So some of our partners include the Unama'ki Institute of Natural Resources, UINR. They represent the 5 Mi'kmaq communities on Cape Breton Island in Nova Scotia. UINR was formed to ensure the sustainable use and protection of natural resources while maintaining Unama'ki and Mi'kmaq traditions and worldviews. We also work with the Confederacy of Mainland Mi'kmaq, a nonprofit that works to proactively promote and assist Mi'kmaq community initiatives towards self-determination and enhancement of community. Also in our group of supporters is Oceans North, who support marine conservation in partnership with Indigenous and coastal communities. So on behalf of all of us bringing together the webinars, always a few housekeeping tidbits for those who are new to our series, and especially important tonight, it's our very last one, and I'd love to see it just be the best one that we've had so far. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us to learn about Indigenous-led marine conservation. Again, and as always, please keep your cameras and your microphones off during the presentation. In the last 30 minutes, we'll ask our Indigenous participants to join us in just a loose-fitting conversation, and you can turn your cameras on at that point. Remember that there will be a door prize tonight supporting Mi'kmaq artisans. So I have everybody's email, and we'll put in the chat the winner of that. So early congratulations to the lucky participant. If you have questions or comments, which I hope that you do and are willing to share, you can drop them in the chat. It's monitored by our amazing facilitator, and they'll be addressed towards the end of the presentation. So there'll be a Q&A portion just before 7 o'clock, and then the last 30 minutes will be sort of a Q&A conversation. As a reminder, the presentation tonight is going to be recorded. It's released on our YouTube channel, and if you don't have the link, we'll be sure to drop it in the chat. That's where you can find all of the previous webinars from both seasons, as well as tonight's will be posted there. And just a reminder that the Q&A portion will not be recorded. We are going to be starting tonight with opening prayers from KMKNO's own Allison Bernard, who has a strong passion for Mi'kmaq rights. A little introduction about Al. His father was chief of his community for 25 years, and Al himself is a former police officer who left to pursue public office, where he was a council member for 10 years up in Eskasoni. Al himself has fought for Mi'kmaq rights and has won court cases in Nova Scotia and at the Supreme Court level. He is proud to say he was one of the first Mi'kmaq to introduce moose hunting again in 1987 after his court victory. As a strong advocate of Mi'kmaq rights, Al is extremely proud to be at the forefront of rights and reconciliation in Nova Scotia, and I'm really grateful to work with him. On a personal level, Al's a hunter, a fisherman, and has been a national level athlete all his life for hockey and fastball. So if you're a fan of the sports, you can chat to him about that later. Today, Al is more relaxed. He enjoys life as a grandfather and venturing into the wilderness on these lovely spring days. So it's officially your turn for opening prayers, and I'll hand it over to you, Al. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Beck. I really appreciate it. Kind words, always. As before, I will say, and I will try to translate everything that I do have, but unfortunately, you know, my language is my language, and there are words that I cannot translate. So in any case, I'll get the ball rolling. Again, it'll be in Mi'kmaq. I'll try to translate a little bit of it, as much as I can, but you know, hopefully it'll work out. Hopefully our creator will give me the translations that are needed to make this an effective prayer. Anyway, Dan delwidi midi la Canada aseg unnog Hawaii waji chinum no te was kawasit nige bilu yelno nemiga bilu ege squidnu wata khada sit khamula abana marudi agams la bahti min al gidna mari gisko mi meji min al gidna mari jog asami olo da sit khamo min da gizi gina muyak oladu ak awula sisa abana muyak dan da kho gizi gina muyak ki begis liya sit khamula miga magi Hata amiga ma was ko vida gatting na megumsud. Dan eludia gulamo moutless wana mawaluk sia gabmiga giz mawali kila mushpa mistlu wan bilwa gavam no na no wasit. Tuapsi nige abana musne garua ninen bas gizates ne amigo la sangwa. Tuapsul di da mi me schweises sko vida gamasi skeduga aligo tia bahtu mi me allegida jiga tabu gada jiga Jujishk, Waisis, Piloamo Soldiga, Damna, Wamad Midi, Titramomino. Edo, Yamsid one, Abonamin and Muda, Amsid, now what's there? Yamsid Norama. There's still a way, Amsid Noraman, and then there was Kudum, then Amsid one, was Kawasit, I said, come on, imagine. I'll leg Ali, I'll like Jassit. Adam, Titramomino, Wamod immediate, Gislam Mudis, and Amsid, Tanwanim, the Wamod immediately. I'm a Shabaji die, Taho, in a Muyagab. Oh Lord, as he sit Hamola. Magizado Wango, la Murimu, Imo, Gindiscam, Kizok. So, Ludlu Basandel Juwalanin, Iginamuin, not Lusuan, the Teljiganal, Bilway, what gizing in a wiggle, Gilliganum with the Tandelizi Gisco, Atandele Gisco, Walalin, Habasi Piwalanin. So, I just want to thank everybody and especially our creator for putting us all together in this one room. I said that we have First Nations from all over, including Hawaii and the world and wherever people are coming to join. We're all here for a common goal, and it was we try to bring back to what the state of our world was in when it was created for us. You know, unfortunately, the non-native population of this world has destroyed our world in various parts of it, oceans, air, land, our fresh water, everything around us, it has been compromised. And it's up to us today to work together and find a resolution. With our creator, with our creator's guidance, he's actually set this up for us. We have no control over our lives. Well, the road has already been set by him. And this is where the crossroads where we all meet and try to resolve issues. The government has tried previously, but you know he's also to blame for a lot of our troubles today because the resistance of trying to keep our environment clean, including oceans, waters, everything around us has been, I guess, somewhat destroyed, and we're at a crucial point of our humanity where we have to fix it. We have to try to fix it, and it's with our creator's guidance and support. This will not happen without him. So if anybody thinks that we don't have somebody watching out for us, it's certainly we do. And it's our creator. And I'm very thankful for putting me in a situation where I can say an opening prayer that'll, with the voice that he has given me and actually putting everybody together and through mind, spirit, hearts, everything about what we're trying to do here, he's the common bond that has created all of us. And we're here today from him, and without him, nothing will be done or accomplished. So all our various religions, races everywhere around this world, we're here to try to fix what he has given us. So with that, I know there's a lot of things that I can't remember or translate, but that is our opening, and it is all through our creator's voice that has with this language, Mi'kmaq, that has resonated throughout our area. Oladio. Thank you.
Well, Alan, thank you so much, Al. It's really nice to hear your views and to have you with us. So thanks for starting us out on a good note. As always, I'd like to introduce our wonderful facilitator before I turn it over to her to work her magic, Dr. Heidi Wiegand. Heidi began Sorry, Heidi's just been the best facilitator with us throughout the webinar series, and knowing tonight is the last night that I get to introduce her is almost a little bit bittersweet. So Heidi works as an assistant professor in management with Dalhousie University. She focuses on leadership development, systemic discrimination, and resiliency. Heidi has extensive experiences working with First Nation leaders and communities, and a passion for cultivating self-governing practices and sustainable communities. Heidi's been exploring the role of cultural resiliency and how we connect socially during COVID-19, and as research and workshops develop to cultivate resilience leadership. I'm really thrilled to be able to turn it over to you for the last time, Heidi. Thanks, take it away.
Great, thank you very much, Beck. Much appreciated for the kind intro, and thank you very much, Allison, for the great prayers to get us off into a good way. I'm delighted tonight to be able to introduce two guest speakers. So the first is Ikulu Lindsay, and Ikulu is raised on Maui, where he loved visiting his grandparents' home in Lahaini to surf, swim, and fish in the waters of Pulani. Ikulu graduated from Kemahela schools on Oahu and earned a BBA at University of Hawaii at Mano. Ikulu's parents, Ed Lindsay, a native Hawaiian and lifelong school teacher, and Puani Lindsay co-founded the Maui Cultural Lands in 2002. After his father passed away in 2009, Ikulu carried forward his family's legacy of service and their vision of protecting and restoring Hawaiian cultural resources and the marine environment. Ikulu also co-founded the Puani Hui and the first community-managed Makai area CMMA on Maui. Ikulu sits on many nonprofit boards and donates his time freely to create a better world by serving the present for those not yet born. And as Ikulu's co-presenter, we are delighted to have Heather Barna. And Heather cares deeply about good relationships among all beings. For over 2 decades, she has used conservation planning as a way to think carefully about how to attend to those relationships and create pathways forward that serve complex and unknown futures. Heather embraces invitations to support Indigenous-led conservation through a myriad of forms of collaboration, training, capacity building, project management, workshop design, and facilitation, including grant writing, mentorship, reporting, and advisory support. In her collaborations with communities and nations, she supports the interests in adapting participatory community-led planning tools to best serve their needs. She is always looking for opportunities to say yes to relationships that stimulate her creativity, learning, and growth. So Ikulu and Heather, we are delighted to have you presenting to us tonight. So we'll just have you share your slides on the screen, and then we'll turn over to you to get us started.
All right. Hi, everyone. It's really nice to see some familiar faces in the crowd. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the invitation to both Ikulu and myself. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging and thanking the Indigenous peoples who have cared for all of the lands that we have the honor of being in relationship with today, the homelands, the waters of the Mi'kmaq, Hawaiians, and those of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation from where I'm calling in. And it's my deep hope that our conversation today is part of this sea change of Indigenous-led conservation, where we come together to strengthen our shared responsibilities to the health and well-being for all creation for generations to come. Willalan for the invitation. I'm going to share a little bit about myself. I'm a first-generation settler. I grew up in rural New Brunswick. I'm familiar with the Maritimes, but I now live in southwestern Quebec with my husband, who's a furniture maker, and 2 amazing boys who keep me young, a little bit crazy, hopeful, and committed to my own life journey of learning how to be in good relationship. I worked most of my adult life with NGOs as a conservation planner, including New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. And for the last 2 years, I've been working independently as a self-employed consultant, accompanying and supporting community-led planning. I have to confess that although I think of myself in my personal sphere as a bit of a water baby, in my professional life, I have very much been a land lover, supporting terrestrial protections. So it was really exciting when Trish from UINR asked me if I wanted to join this conversation, and I couldn't say no, but I knew enough to invite Ikulu to join me. And I also was somewhat powerless to resist this surge of marine sayings and cliches that just came to me as I was developing the slides. So thank you for indulging me in those. I really don't get a chance to use them in the terrestrial world. And it's kind of fun just to pull them in. Over to you, Ekolu.
Aloha, everybody, and thank you for allowing me to spend some time with you. These are just some images that pretty much tells you who I am and what I've done when it comes to conservation. I actually come from a background in real estate, but I've been living this world all my life. And as a child growing up with cultural icons that they were just grandma and grandpa and mom and dad at the time, I didn't realize how much I was learning because the norm has switched. It's not the norm anymore. And to me, what is common sense is something special nowadays. Change slide. So our story started back in 2000, well, before 2010, where we started to formalize. This is our backyard. Now, what you see is paradise, beautiful palm trees and ocean and nice warm weather. I'm not used to cold weather. But when you look closer, you take a look at the colors of the corals, mostly brown, they're impacted. My father, back in early 2000s, was a diver, and he dove out here before his passing and said, something's wrong. I'm not seeing the colors. I'm not seeing the fish. We need to do something. So his passing in 2009 allowed me the opportunity to raise my hand and say, in a meeting, and say, I got someplace we can try and save. And this happened to be it. Now, this happened in a meeting that included the Nature Conservancy. Some people may not have differences of opinions of them, but I thought, well, let me try. And this is where the story begins. And I'll allude to this story a little bit as Heather presents some of the process that is involved. Thank you, Heather. You can advance, please.
Okay, so we'll be speaking to you today about community-led adaptive management. Given the critical importance of oceans in sustaining all of life on the planet and the urgency that Al spoke of, the cumulative impacts of many pressures on ocean systems, we know we need to act now. And yet it's not always straightforward how to act. We're working in times of huge complexity, massive uncertainty. We know it's not enough just to draw lines on a map. We need to do more, and we need to be taking action in a wise way, in a way that we're setting ourselves up to know, are we implementing well? Are we doing the right things? Are we doing them well? Is it effective what we're doing? And are we having an impact? Are we seeing change to the things that we really care about, those aspirations? This is a very generic adaptive management planning cycle where you plan, you do, you monitor, you check. If you're not on course, you adapt. And the conservation standards are probably the most renowned version of that adaptive management cycle used by thousands of practitioners worldwide to plan for largely, or at least initially, biodiversity conservation. And over time, what we've seen is this kind of convergent evolution of planning processes around the world when they saw conservation standards and saw the potential, but also recognized this doesn't completely work. We need a process that's more indigenous-led, that's more holistic in bringing together culture and biodiversity values all within the same tent. And so in Australia, healthy country planning emerged. And similarly in Hawaii, the Malama Ike Kai Community Action Guide emerged. Again, partly through conservation standards, some influence through healthy country planning, but also with local and marine specific management inspiration. Similarly in Chile and Papua New Guinea, these kind of frameworks have been customized to meet the local needs. I'm going to be speaking in Ekolu to, thinking of these kind of interchangeably. They're definitely distinct, but for the purposes of today's talk, we're going to kind of see them all under the same umbrella. So as I mentioned, These planning frameworks have been used worldwide by hundreds of practitioners from many organizations. They have diverse applications. So they're used for protected area plans, including IPCAs, terrestrial and sea country plans. You could use them for species recovery plans or regional conservation plans. And nations are also using them to plan their own resource development projects. Planning is effectively an act of self-determination. It's saying and describing the desired future that a community or nation wants to be working toward. I love this quote, plan or be planned. It's that sense of getting out ahead of the other plans.
So we were introduced to planning terminology, and more scientific terminology when we're used to Hawaiian terminology. So being able to bridge these worlds was a challenge. What are conservation standards? How do I get where I want to go? How do I know where I'm at? I'm going to fast forward a little bit. We did this conservation action plans for ourselves using these conservation standards. We learned a lot, but in those circles that Heather, the process that Heather just talked about, in the middle, in my mind, it's all based on trust. How do you elicit trust with government, the community, and partners? So over the years, we formalized a network of other people that were doing similar work. And we found that by moving together, we can move together quickly by sharing the successes, the attempts, and the lessons learned, to the point where our original 6 community members that got together and went through a process of discussions of, do we want to create a network? We have now grown through 9 members, and we also have 4 organizations that support us: the Nature Conservancy, Maui Nui Marine Resource Council, Kua'aina Uluawamo, and the Coral Reef Alliance. It is through these partnerships that we can effect change. Next slide. And I just wanted you to see some of the people that are involved. Now, it is not just Indigenous people. It is Indigenous led, utilizing conservation standards as we looked at formalized processes, and we infuse our cultural processes into that space to change those standards so it makes sense to us. And once again, this is all based on trust. So that trust is elicited through good work, hard work. And I think we all test each other at some point when we go into each other's spaces and can identify what kind of worker you are. If you are a good worker in a taro patch, so to speak, that's like a rice paddy field, and you get muddy and it's hard work. If you can work hard in those spaces, I trust you. Let's talk story, right? So I'll be sharing more of that story throughout Heather's presentation. Go ahead, Heather.
Thank you. So let's get into some of the definitions and the backstory of healthy country planning and these other planning frameworks too. So effectively, at its very core, healthy country planning is a way to connect where we are now with our deepest aspirations. And the planning process is Indigenous-led, it's participatory, it ensures that culture, people, and their knowledge are central to the planning process. It just recognizes that a plan is so much more likely to succeed if the people implementing it are empowered, if they believe in the plan, if they have that trust among themselves that Ekolu spoke of, if they're at the helm, if they are steering the journey. And so these planning processes, they're inclusive, they're representative of the whole diversity of community voices. They include elders, youth, two-spirit, non-binary, men and women, so that the whole community can gather around this plan, that it's not, for a certain niche of the community. Some of the key features of these planning processes is that the planning happens on country. And when I say on country, that comes in healthy country planning from the Aborigines, Australian Aborigines use of the word, in this sense that in order for country to be healthy, people need to be healthy. And in order for people to be healthy, country needs to be healthy. So it's not just thinking about, you know, kind of the biophysical land. Being on lands and waters is the right place to talk about lands and waters, not in boardrooms, not in hotel conference centers. This is where we have that intergenerational transfer of knowledge, elders and youth working together, sharing skills. Planning becomes the tool for cultural revitalization and a way of elevating Indigenous stewardship ways. The decision-making, the endorsement in that planning process is adapted to the local decision-making structure and cultural protocols. So we're not imposing a Western framework upon communities and displacing their traditions. We need to understand that we can't rush the planning process. We need to accept that other commitments, which are often cultural commitments, will take precedence time and time again, and that in order to hear the stories and the feelings behind the stories, we can't rush on a timeline. Planning can be part of healing, but again, not if it's rushed. We want to avoid jargon. We want to use the terms, the place names that mean something to the community that's doing the planning in their language. And both the planning process and the products themselves tend to be really exciting, really relatable, engaging, accessible, relevant. So we're thinking story maps, videos, Facebook pages. We're not thinking Word documents. Here's a little snapshot of healthy country planning in Canada. Healthy country planning came ashore in 2015, led by Stuart Cowell, an Australian consultant who has truly been instrumental in developing healthy country planning in Australia. And there are now a few plans that are in implementation, one from New Brunswick, the Fort Valley First Nation, Amlungog Healthy Country Plan, and many others scattered across the country in progress. I have not heard of a marine-based IPCA that has used healthy country planning for management planning, so there's an interesting opportunity there. And at this point, there isn't really any kind of coordination of these planning processes. So everyone's kind of experimenting on their own, which is a wonderful space to be in. This is a bit more detail on what the planning process looks like. And we'll go into that more in detail. I think of the planning process because, you know, some people get really turned on by seeing stuff like this and some of us glaze over. But what's really important to understand is that the planning process is like the rudder. It's what guides the vessel from one port or one community to another, overcoming challenges along the way and ultimately, you know, getting to that final destination. But you need more than a helm, you need more than a rudder, you need oarsmen. So this is the participation of the communities who ultimately are powering the boat, and these come together. They work together. If you don't have the commitment of those who row, that boat's going nowhere. And also, if you don't have a good rudder, that ship is going to go who knows where. Might eventually get to the destination, but probably you're going to lose the commitment of the oarsmen and women en route. So these two things go together. So remember, when I'm talking about the planning, that the oarsmen are critical as well. The very first step, and this is super important, we tend not to do it because we just want to jump in and take action, but the first step is planning to plan. So we got to take our time, we got to start at the very beginning, because we need to be confident that we can proceed and that there'll be good engagement, there'll be good resourcing before we launch. So we want to know, what's the purpose? Why are we doing this? We want it to know that we have the expertise, we have the funding, we have the infrastructure to do the planning and also to implement. And there's nothing more demoralizing for a community than to go through a planning process that, you know, the plan just sits on the shelf. So we need to know that we're going to do something with all of this work. And then we want to be clear about how we're going to plan. What's a culturally appropriate way to go through this process? What products do we generate and what are our timelines? And this pre-planning stage is a really important part of free, prior, and informed consent, so that the community understands what the planning process is going to look like and which parts they want and don't want. Then we go in to define and articulate our bold and aspirational vision. So this is, what is it that success would look like? And we bring the whole community again together around that vision.
Pre-planning. What is that? I was like, I mean, you got a plan to do something, and it just didn't make sense, because I think we all recognize the many challenges that exist in our space and we want to go ahead and solve it. But I found the pre-planning an effective tool to get to where you want to go effectively with the community that is involved there. And there's a lot of adaptive management that needs to happen as we move through this process. I just wanted to share with you the vision that we came up with in our place. And I'll just read it from here, that the waters of Polonui are thriving with an abundance of native fishes and limu. The community is empowered through aloha, which is love and compassion, to malama, which means take care of, to cherish, na papalimo o pi'ilani, which is the name of this reef, and ho'omao, move forward with in our traditions for future generations. So we like to use these cultural processes of malama and ho'omao to understand the challenges that exist, but more importantly, identify how we can get there. I think we are all quick to try different solutions, but it's only through proper planning that you can get there quickly and effectively, utilizing the tools the government allows, but also the tools that allows for trust to build within the community so you can work cohesively together and move forward. Next slide. I think you're up, Heather. Thank you.
Thank you. Just briefly. So then, we have our vision, we've done our pre-planning, then this is like the mapping time. Like, where exactly are we talking about? And anyone who's done this sort of boundary setting delineation knows that it's not straightforward. How we would want to do it is in a very participatory, a very sensitive way. This is really precious wisdom and knowledge. And so thinking so carefully about how to manage that part of the process. Absolutely, if work has already been done, build upon that, and understand also that inevitably the initial scope of the project will expand and contract as the planning moves forward. Once we have the scope, it becomes clear what are the values that we care about within that area. And so by values in one of these healthy country planning or similar processes, those are biocultural values. It's not just the biodiversity. These are, we're bringing side by side the cultural and socioeconomic values, as well as the ecosystems and the communities and the species that we have more of a tradition of planning for.
That term values does have a lot of Western connotations for us. And it does bring about some diversity at times. How do you value a reef? And when it's intrinsic, it's an important part of who we are. So we've kind of changed those values to processes. And I wanted to show you our scope of work. And this is basically roughly almost a half mile of coastline that we thought we could effectively manage. So looking at our scopes, looking at the history of how we got to the many challenges that exist within our area, also recognize that there is a stream coming through, that it's an important part of biodiversity. But this, moving forward, was a mistake for us. Our scope of work was too small. As we selected our target species, we needed to take into consideration the range that they live in and protect the other habitat. But during this planning process, it appeared for us while we were doing it that this is perfect because we can see it. It's within our eyes shot. and we can manage it more effectively. But going through our governmental process in the United States, this was not good enough. So we have to adaptively manage to increase our scope of work, having gone through probably 4 years of work at that time. There are other communities that are 20 years into it already and still going through these processes. It doesn't stop us from doing it. We continue to do this work because it is our kuleana, our responsibility to cherish these spaces and hold on to them and provide the vibrancy for those who are not yet here. Okay. Thank you, Heather.
Right. So what makes a value vibrant? In healthy country planning, we talk about that in terms of values health. And so here's a table that is summarizing across 3 different values. The first row of the value is connection to the ocean, youth connection to the ocean. And then below that, you have the value of eels, and below that is piping plovers. So for each of those, how healthy is it? And how do we know if it's healthy? So in Western framework, that would be an indicator, how we know if it's healthy. And let's just take a closer look at eel. So there's many ways of knowing if eels are healthy. Are they parasite free? Is there good connectivity? But oftentimes we're not thinking about the relationship between people and eels. When eels are healthy, it's because traditional uses and stories are known. And so if we describe that those traditional uses and stories are known as poor, that's telling us that is actually something that we probably want to be thinking about in terms of the actions we design. So in this way, we're bringing together Western ways of knowing about the health, like the parasite load, as well as the community's ways of knowing, akin to two-eyed seeing. And this ultimately informs where action is most urgently needed. So if you were looking at this table, having gone through all of that thought process, you might think, well, where we need to be really giving our attention is to those traditional uses and stories about eels, so that we are in good relationship with eels. And then, so if eels are not healthy, why? What's going on? What are the pressures? What are the human actions that are degrading the health? So we're going to brainstorm all of those pressures, and then we're going to rate them. How widespread are they? How big of an impact are they having? And how irreversible, how fixable are those problems? So then again, across the different pressures, we have a sense of, okay, we really need to work on aquaculture. We can set aside some of these other pressures. Aquaculture is where we can really make an impact.
Yeah, we found valuing these resources a little challenging, but if you put enough fishers and traditional practitioners, as well as scientists in a room, you can come up with a pretty good value for that target resource. I wanted to share with you one of our challenges here. The reef gets low, we have a lot of recreational use, and people do not understand that are visiting how important coral reefs are in Hawaii. It is the foundation of our cultural lens of how life began. Within our creation chants, the first form of life is the coral reef polyp. That speaks to the foundation of culture, but also of food sustainability. If we cannot take care of our corals properly, what is going to happen for our future? So we have identified the commercialized recreational use that continues to this point out here as one of the biggest destructive uses that we have, and how do we mitigate some of these challenges? Thank you.
And when we think about these challenges, we don't just stop there. You know, we don't just stop saying, okay, you know, kayaking on reefs is a problem. We want to swim a little deeper with those pressures and identify what's happening upstream. So what are the root causes of those pressures? So we're bringing the pieces all together as one story, the whole story, where we focus on the relationships between the pressures, their root causes, and the values themselves. And this is a really powerful step in a planning process of bringing together everyone's knowledge across generations and trying to have this very full, this very whole story of what is going on.
This root cause analysis was really eye-opening for us, by really diving into what we think is the problem and what happens because of that problem, so we can effectively manage how to alleviate some of the pressures in our ocean when it comes to our commercialized recreational uses, but also water. Water is a huge thing throughout the world. What's happening with water? Basically, we all come down to people problems. We remove our destructive practices. I really believe after the pandemic, nature will bounce back. Thank you, Heather. You're up.
And this whole story of these root causes becomes the scaffolding upon which we decide what actions to take. So here in this somewhat recognizable example for some of you, I imagine, the group said what they cared about, the value, is seeing a bald eagle. And what is damaging that value is that there's restricted access to the Indigenous protected and conserved area. So the group peeled back the causes and said, why is there restricted access? Because there's land use conflict. Why is there land use conflict? Well, that's because of private crown land policies. And at the root of that is settler encroachment. So they're telling the whole story, and they're also telling the kind of beacons of hope parts of the story, because it's not all doom and gloom. And even with that, that's just one pathway of this story. And the other pathway is, well, there are physical challenges to access, that it's hard for elders to visit this site, the terrain isn't easily accessible. So when you have this whole story kind of laid out, you get to see where are the good grounds for action, where can we really make an impact? And so that's how you come up with the actions, the strategies that you will take forward in the planning process. So it's a town meeting with the private landowners. It's recruiting earth keepers to take care of the trail. And maybe it's even thinking about other access options. So then once you have, okay, these are the really strategic things that we need to be doing, we flip that story of problems and causes of problems into the solution. We call that a roadmap. So here we have on the right side, what do we care about? We care about ancestral stewardship responsibility. We need there to be less aquaculture in sensitive areas. And we came up with our strategy. We want to look at the impact of aquaculture on biodiversity values and cultural values. And we map out this sequence of stepping stones of how we're going to get from doing what we think is important all the way over to what we care about, ancestral stewardship responsibility. If we do this impact analysis, we think that the public will be more aware. And if we have that increased public awareness, then we ought to see strong political leadership. If we just get that strong political leadership, and again, this is a simplified story, it doesn't work quite as easily as this, as everyone understands. But let's just say all we need is strong political leadership, and then we will have more rigorous rules for renewal of aquaculture tenures. Then there'll be less aquaculture in sensitive areas, and ultimately, this is what we want to be seeing. Elders that go out fishing feel happy again. So this is our roadmap. I want to tell this story in a different way. This is a painting of Percy Jacoby's called Highways, and Percy's from St. Mary's First Nation in New Brunswick. He's a painter, a carver, a beadworker, and he shared this story with me about his painting. I'm just going to read it. This piece depicts how the waterways were once used as roads and highways, of how the water connected us to all things in Woolastook. The deeper meaning is that the river is our cultural connection to the past, and our lack of use and respect for the river leaves us with a lack of understanding of who we once were, who we are in the present, and who we will be in the future. Salmon are an essential part of Woolastookie culture, and their demise in the Woolastook has severed a portion of Woolastookiak being. So we use these roadmaps as a way to connect who we are now with who and where we want to be.
So one of our solutions to our commercialized recreational problems, aside from education, outreach, talking with them, explaining the importance of coral, was we generated a series of posters and gave it to all the commercialized companies to ask them to avoid certain spaces. And on top of that, we put buoys in the water to help them have a little road so they're not continuously crossing over our coral reefs and getting stuck. It's okay when the tide is up. When the tide is low and everyone's stuck, there's a lot of destructive practices that happen on this reef. And this has worked most of the time. There's a high turnover rate here, but that's for another story. Just know that this was one of our solutions to get people to change their practices. Go ahead, Heather. Oh, one more. And the other thing we needed to do was, given the system we currently work in, we can only do so much. We need government support. We are doing the grassroots initiatives, but we do need governmental support on this. So we have started in advocating at the legislature for certain bills that may help and for other opportunities that exist in there, but creating that relationships with our legislatures and getting them in the field to see what's happening. Thanks.
When we're implementing these strategies, whether it be through policy or advocacy, we want to be thinking about adapting as we go. Indigenous communities obviously have long traditions of observation, learning by experience on the land. In each generation, people have made observations, they've compared their experiences with what they've been told by their elders, and they've made conclusions. They've exchanged their findings with others. And so when I think about adaptive management and how much of a kind of buzzword concept that is, I also think, the saying, we don't need to teach granny how to suck eggs. This is something that's already, that there's so much expertise already in being done. If anything, you could say that these planning frameworks kind of systematize or formalize that tradition of observation and adaptation. And they go on to, the roadmaps go on to serve these multiple purposes of helping us decide how to adapt and monitor. They also help us frame out our work plans and budgets effectively. Each of these little teal boxes, these stepping stones that I was talking about, we have to think, okay, who's going to do that? When? How much is it going to cost? Do we have funding? Do we need to raise it? So the roadmaps are, they're helpful in bringing together our ideas about how change works, but they're also really pragmatic tools for operationalizing the plan.
Developing some monitoring was fun for us, getting the community to dive in the water and look at our baseline surveys, do simple surveys like our presence absence surveys. Basically, is it there or not? And over 4 or 5 years of time, you get to see patterns. But the other baseline studies we needed to partner. So we partnered with the Nature Conservancy so they could do our outside baseline studies to look at our fish abundance surveys and create that baseline. So as we move forward with our target species and our action plans, we can go back and do more studies and understand, are we being effective in bringing back our fish populations? Next survey, next slide. And we had that opportunity to do creel surveys and our West Maui perception surveys. Creel surveys basically is extractive. What is, for 1 year, 8 random days a month and 3 random nights, we monitored what was going out. Every 15 minutes, we took a snapshot, put it on paper, put it on a grid, and this is what we found. And our West Maui perception survey was looking at, what do people perceive about coral reefs? Now let's make sure that we fashion our messages so that it hits home to people who are actively engaged in the ocean. Okay, Heather, thanks.
And finally, or it's kind of the last step in the planning process, but effectively it's happening throughout. It's not just something you leave to the end, but we're thinking about, okay, who needs to hear this story? How do we tell them? So we want to be thinking in creative and expansive ways about what are the empowering messages and for whom. And again, this idea of having multiple communications, probably not Word documents, posters, videos, things that people are actually going to pay attention to.
And part of this whole process is inclusive of youth, irregardless of where they are from. We like to share our stories far and wide so that when people go home, if they're visiting, they go home with a set of tools to look in their own backyard, utilizing our cultural processes and values elsewhere in the world. Thank you.
Okay, so we're coming toward the end of our slides, and this is where it's, just kind of a crazy brain dump of a whole bunch of ideas, but I think they're all really important. So here goes like the illegal text of like the illegal slide of way too much text. But these are the things that we have seen in planning processes that we've been involved with, and also in conversations that I've had about the sea country plans from Australia. So their management plans for their IPAs. This is what has really helped their processes, bringing the whole community along. So again, this idea of it's a plan that speaks to all of the voices and perspectives, cultivating community champions and having broad Indigenous leadership. When we have all of our hopes in one or two charismatic individuals, we're very vulnerable in planning processes. So having that redundancy, the establishment of guardian and earthkeeper teams to really implement and contribute to the planning process as well. Building a strong case for donors. So doing the upfront work to really have a strong business case for the planning and the implementation that needs to happen so that it's really shovel ready when the donor sees the proposal. Absolutely. Adequate funding for the planning and doing, that's kind of a given, but absolutely important. And then partnerships are so important. Nicola spoke to this a bit, and certainly these partnerships can be instrumental. And so it's critical to think, when do we engage partners and how do we engage them? In Australia, there was a huge amount of skepticism and resistance to sea country planning. And it really took, maybe a decade of really building the case on terrestrial protection, building the confidence so that the government recognized and was willing to invest in a similar process for sea country planning. Industry has also been a critical partner, both with fisheries as well as cultural tourism, and industry seeing that benefit in terms of corporate social responsibility, seeing that there are benefits of partnering with the First Peoples, of marketing, of cleaning up marine debris, their ability to hire from communities, to run joint patrolling, almost not an option for industry to be offside with the Australian sea country plans, as well as relationships with nonprofits and consultants have been instrumental. What also has been very helpful is having groups advocating collectively on behalf of Indigenous nations. So similar to the work of ILI, the Indigenous Leadership Initiative within Canada. And again, this idea that the success of Indigenous-led conservation with terrestrial IPCAs created the groundwork for sea country planning, and the old people, the elders saying, hey, we need to get our feet wet. We need to extend our terrestrial plans into our sea country estate as well. Also instrumental to the success is hearing Indigenous success stories, having those knowledge exchanges, having networks, having speaker series, these things are almost as important, if not more important, than trainer events. And lastly, can't say this enough, but that there needs to be that adaptation of planning frameworks to local context. This is not kind of a cookie cutter approach. And so conversely, there are also, understandably challenges to community-led management planning for marine-based IPCAs. Participatory planning takes a massive amount of time and money, and typically the more experience that communities have with it, the greater the recognition of actually how much money and time it does take. So there are challenges often in terms of communities having the staff to lead planning processes. And there's also for sea country planning for marine IPCAs, massive capital investment, probably beyond what we see for terrestrial planning, infrastructure, docks, boats, etc. One challenge, absolutely, is misapplying healthy country planning as colonial conservation and using it to displace traditional decision-making ways. So again, coming in with this cookie cutter approach of like, this is how we're going to do things, and not being genuinely responsive to a community's needs. There also have been jurisdictional barriers to holistic planning. So where policy and legal frameworks require that separate planning happens for lands and seas, aquatic and terrestrial plans. And also, a challenge that I have seen repeatedly is that communities are sick and tired of planning. They've had many other planning processes come through their homes, and they haven't actually seen any results. This slide is just to say there are many resources which Kolu and I would be happy to share with you. You have our email addresses there, so you can reach out to us, and we would be happy to have those conversations with you.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you everybody for listening in. As ambassadors of Aloha, Aloha basically is love and compassion. We need to understand the process of kupono, honesty, malama, cherish, kokua, to help without any expectations of reciprocation. That is true aloha. Aloha is automatic. Aloha is sweeter when it is shared. And thank you all for your time. If you have any questions on this aloha equation I just talked about, I can talk about that thing for hours. So please, thank you.
And I have this closing slide because we did begin with the canoe reference, and I'd like to read it. I think this was from the Impact 5 gathering a month or so back, and it says, "This water brings us together. We have to use the power of this water to heal and care and love it. Hawaiians have canoes, Maori have canoes, First Nations have canoes. We all have the power, that we are one with the water. So why don't we use our power, our voice, our chanting, our stories to paddle together?" This call to paddle together comes now at a critical time. As Al said, we're at this crossroads. By coming together, by collaborating, by sharing our experiences, we can work in a good way. Walaliak.
Kulu and Heather, such an amazing presentation. I think you can see from, I know you can't see the comments, but you probably can now that you've taken your screen down. There's so many thank yous. What we typically do at this point in time is we move into an Indigenous closed session, and we ask people that are not identifying as Indigenous to leave. But I think I'll just allow for a moment, because it's such an informative presentation, just to see if there's any diehard questions out there in the chat, if anybody wants to ask them. Just so we make sure we give everybody that opportunity. So I'll just check to see if anybody has anything other than just pure praise for all of the amazing things that you've shared, and it seems that we have lots of praise. And again, if anybody wants to, if anybody has a diehard question before we move over into another sort of closed discussion space, we'll just make sure. All right, Beck, did you want to announce the winner of the door prize at this point before we say farewell to some of our friends?
I would love to. Thank you, Heidi. I was just working on typing it in the chat, so you caught me at a perfect time. We do have a door prize winner for tonight, picked from a random name picker. So tonight's winner is David Paul. We do have your email on record, so I'll reach out to get an address and send you a door prize. We always work to support a Mi'kmaq artisan. And so I'm excited to work with UINR on sending you the prize, and congratulations.
Wonderful. Congratulations, David. So at this point, what we're going to do is, if you identify as Indigenous and welcome you into the session with Heather and Nikolu, we'll go into that private session. If somebody doesn't identify as Indigenous, then we just ask that you can, the video will be there, but it's just an opportunity for people to gather insights directly from Nikolu and Heather. So we wish you a good evening, and we'll turn it back over into the other session. So